All right. So I really want to thank Dimitri for getting out here and probably taking the less popular opinion in this room. I mean, it's really commendable to go up and actually say, we're not here to try and convince the people in this room. I think the people in this room are already convinced, right? But it's important for us to remember that there are people outside this bubble. I'm reminded when we go to leadership training, they always say, whenever you have to make a decision as a group of people, there's going to be 20% of the people that are totally on board with whatever it is that you're proposing. I'm suspecting that this is the 20% that we have here. There's 20% of people that will tell you that regardless of what you try, it will never work. And then there's the 60% in the middle that are like, eh. And so that's the people that you actually have to convince, right? Or that you have to nudge. We saw an example of carrot and stick in Dimitri's talk. I'll talk about that more as well. But before we go into that, I'm going to set up the landscape a little bit. So my name is Bas Rokers. I'm a professor of psychology at New York University, Abu Dhabi. And New York University aspires to be a global university, and so they have campuses throughout the world. Their three major campuses are in Shanghai, Abu Dhabi, and in New York. And I divide my time between New York and Abu Dhabi. All right, so what's the overall goal? Like, why are we here? What are we trying to achieve? I think one way that we can think of that is that we wish to accelerate scientific progress. And I think one of the things that has happened as a result is people have resorted to what you might call fast science, right? Just like we have fast food, there's fast science. And Dimitri alluded to this. So, one way to achieve that is by cutting corners, trying to work out what's the least publishable unit. And I don't think that's the direction that we want to go into. And then the question is, what can you do? We've had an example that Dimitri said where he's mainly looking backwards and say, let's look at what worked well in the past. And I think that's a very useful thing to do. But then, of course, it also says that, you can take the opposite view and say, let's look forward. Let's see what's possible now that was not possible in the past, given the resources that we have available to us now. Because what worked in the past might not actually work in the future. Now, I like the figure showing that, there were people like Faraday or Newton that were doing very amazing science without outside of the current structure. They didn't have peer review. That's a very recent addition, as Dimitri will point out. But I think that it's important to remember that science was performed in a very different way. So either you were independently wealthy, and that's when you could be like a gentleman and sometimes a gentlewoman of leisure, and you could do science as a hobby. Or you had to find a wealthy individual that would take you on and basically would be your patron, and you would work for them. You would work for them in the royal court, or later you would work for, independently rich industrials, for example. Well, if you're in the UAE, that may still be an opportunity in some cases, but in most places, that's not the case. And so it's always, I don't know how depressing this is, but I think it really is important to consider science as a business. We like to think of ourselves as like artists more than businessmen, but I think there's analogies there. So I think a good analogy is the movie industry, right? There's always this tension between movie producers and directors. And what movie producers will point out to directors is that this is show business, right? And that has two components, show and business. Like if it doesn't make money, it's not going to happen. And so, when we have our dean or people higher up complaining to us, it is because they're trying to set up a structure in which we can do our work. And so I think it's good to think about our work as being part of a business enterprise. All right. I do agree with Dimitri that reputation currently plays too small a role. It's too easy to publish papers, maybe incrementally, maybe even like worse, like, sloppy, too fast. And so then the question is, what do you do about this? So there might be different solutions. So rather than narrowing access to scientific careers, you can try and look at what modern means would be to bring reputation back. Now, of course, I'm not the only one. I'm not just making this up. In fact, we had Samir talk about this. We had Aga talk about this. Some of these points that I'm going to offer, they're going to be exactly the same as what you've seen before. Sometimes it's nice to package it all together and present it in one piece. Just to like point this out, right? So there are people that have looked into this extensively, and so we know what we want, right? We want these kind of like fair principles. And most funding agencies now require that you have a plan for sharing your data and also sharing your analysis. Now, as people that have already spoken before me have pointed out, it's nice to have this data sharing plan. But when I, as a scientist, try and go to somebody's GitHub repository and try and run their analysis, more often than not, I'm unsuccessful, like things will fail. And I think there, NeuroLibre can provide a nice intermediate solution, right? Because it doesn't necessarily depend on the person who produced it. Well, they produce a document that is then ready-made, and that stays working, as opposed to what you have is like, here's a GitHub repository. A third party needs to actually check that repository and make sure that it works. All right, so here we have the carrot and the stick. You already saw that before. And so what can we do to nudge the 60% of people that are in the middle, right? That would do the right thing if they were properly as incentivized, but in the absence of these incentives, would not choose to do the right thing. So tools like crowdsourcing and data analytics were not available at scale to us in the past. They are available now. And we know about these resources, right? So Data Colada is like a very important, in my view, initiative. PubPeer is something else. And so we have to provide tools to those individuals to do their work more effectively. And that means also funding needs to go this way, right? Because a lot of the people that set up these initiatives, they didn't do it because of monetary incentives. They did it because, well, as some of them have told me personally, because they were just like physically angry by looking at like reproduce or figures that were copied and pasted from one to the other, right? They're incentivized to do that. And so we want to support that and actually allow them to do that at scale. Carrot. So I think a major issue has been, of course, and this was pointed out already, that publishing null results is complicated. And I think here, something like NeuroLibre can kind of help offset some of those perceived downsides, because it might make it more justifiable to publish a null result if what you're doing is you're providing data that's queryable within the paper. So this will give you a publication where previously you would not be able to publish. And I think that's an incentive that might work as a key. All right, so Nicola asked me to talk a little bit about, what will I do to actually be part of this? And so in Abu Dhabi, what we're doing, similar to other parts of the world, is setting up a normative database that includes brain imaging data, but also other kinds of data. So I'll go through this, and then I'll say how I intend to incorporate that in a NeuroLibre publication. So in the context of that effort, we collect demographics and health information. We collect genetics. And this is already, I'm going a little fast. This has already been done in 16,000 Emiratis. Now, Emiratis are interesting because, well, they're interesting because there's intermarriage. So this leads to consanguinity, for example. And so from a genetic perspective, that's an interesting sample. It's not like everybody's intermarrying, but there's like definitely more relatedness than you would have in this part of the world, for example. We also collect a set of neuroimaging data that's very much modeled on what the UK Biobank is doing. So this is a 60-minute protocol, getting multimodal images. And then we collect behavior. I'm a visual neuroscientist by training, and we believe that some visual measures might be early biomarkers for the kind of disorders that are prevalent in the UAE. Ask me about that later if you want to know more. And so we're collecting this assay of visual function in order to see if we can actually predict negative health outcomes down the road. No, okay, so how do you take that data? What can you do there? So one thing that we want to do is we want to publish, the fruits of our labor. And so what we'll do is we'll take the first 100 individuals that we've already collected in this data set and put that in a publication that compares that against publicly available data. Now, it's very likely that those results will contain a very large number of null results, right? So brains are more similar than they're different. And so under modern publication standards, your incentive would be to focus on the differences and kind of like shove all of these commonalities under the rug, even though those would be the vast majority of your results. And so if we do this, we can show our proof of work, comparing it against available data sets. So that is the stick. And we would relieve some of the pressure that we have in publishing null results. So that's the carrot in that case, right? And so I think this is a good example of how to think, or maybe how to communicate to your colleagues that are not sold on how you might actually get something that you couldn't get before. So to conclude, I believe that we should apply modern solutions to age-old problems, but I think I have an easier job here because I'm preaching to the choir. I don't think there's a single solution that will address all issues. I do think that it's helpful to nudge researchers to do the right thing. Many of us will do the right thing regardless, but some of us, are coming up for like tenure. And at that point, there's a lot of pressure to produce things because it affects like the rest of your academic career. And so rich publication formats like NeuroLibre will help address reputational issues and relieve pressure against null results. I look forward to discussing this more. And I want to thank everybody in Abu Dhabi that makes all the work that we do possible. Also, we have Nicola. I think this is a theme, like every single talk needs to have a picture of Nicola at like various stages of development. So he's in here. We had a great time in Abu Dhabi. I don't know, if you're interested. And so is Aga, yes. And so if you're interested in spending some time there, come talk to me and we get something up. If you're interested in collaborating, I'd love to do that, connecting data sets that we can collect there to data sets that are being collected elsewhere. Thank you for your attention.